Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, and Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on our authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to my virtual booth here at the Festival of Storytellers. My name is Carl Brush. I write historical fiction, and I'm here to share with you my publications. I have 6 different novels that I brought to the festival. I'm not going to go into depth on all of them today. I've chosen just one, which I will get to in a minute. In the meantime, I want to review quickly, just so that you have an idea of the range of the work that I've brought here. This is Bonita, one of my favorite literary characters in the whole world, and I'm sorry, all you other authors like Tolstoy and those people who have also somehow or another invented memorable characters. I still like Bonita. She starts out as a 12-year-old girl in this book, and she's out roping grizzly bears, and she proceeds to an incredible number of adventures and trials and tribulations. They're all exciting. And she does this in the area where most of my books take place. They take place in the San Francisco Bay Area, the area between the High Sierra and San Francisco. And so that is where I live. That's where my great-grandparents came across the plain in the area where they settled way back in 1864. And so somehow or another, I've been drawn to both the history and the location. I love it. I've been a lot of places in the world, but I always come back here, and I'm always glad I did. Bonita has a sequel. It's called You Can't Keep Her. One of the trials and tribulations that Bonita runs into is that she has a daughter. The daughter is stolen from her at birth, and a great deal of both Bonita and this You Can't Keep Her is a search for her daughter, and also, incidentally, a search for her parents, whom she's never met, but they're reputed to be criminals. Bonita doesn't believe it, and she goes out searching both for her daughter and for the truth about her parents. And that's what You Can't Keep Her is all about. It's about making sure she gets her daughter back. And finally, the Maxwell Vendetta is the first book in a trilogy about the Maxwell family of California. They own a big ranch up in the Sierras, and they're a pretty rich and powerful family. And in the course of the book, somebody murders one of the members of the family, and then the hunt is on to try to find who did that and why, and who has a vendetta against the Maxwells. So that covers the Maxwell vendetta. They think they've got rid of the villain in the Maxwell vendetta, and then they discover he comes back from another tribe. There's plenty of romance, plenty of adventure, a lot of exploration of very touchy social and racial issues in both of these books. They're not just adventure, old Wild West kinds of things. There's a lot to chew on. They take place around the turn of the 20th century, and so a lot of the issues are really relevant to today's world. The third book in the trilogy, which has yet to be published, it's coming out next month, is called Swindle in Sawtooth Valley. The Sawtooth Valley is the location of the ranch, and it's named after the three big granite peaks that rise up at the head of the valley. And so that's the reason that the Sawtooth Peaks gave their name to all the various geographic and community features all around. So that's an overview of what you're not going to see in depth today. Instead, I'm going to give you the one book that departs from Northern California. This is The Yellow Rose. It takes place, instead of in California, in Texas. There's a very interesting genesis, I think it's interesting, to this whole thing. I received a call or an email, I can't remember which, from Bob Stewart, who's a gentleman that I met at various writers' conferences, and we'd corresponded online back and forth. And he said, listen, I have this idea for a novel, and I'd like you to join me, and we can write it together. And I said, all right. I'd never tried to collaborate like that before, but I was open to the idea. Bob is from Texas. He born and raised in San Antonio, and so he's very familiar both with the area and the history of the state. And he said that he would like to do a novel about the Texas Revolution. Well, I was kind of skeptical. I said, Bob, do you think you have the right person? You know, I don't know that much about Texas history. And I know the Texas Revolution happened, but I'm very vague about when it happened and who was involved and so on and so forth. I just don't know if I'm the right person to join up. And he said, well, I like your writing, so let me run the idea past you and let you know. So the overall view that he gave me was that the Yellow Rose was an actual flesh and blood woman. Now, the only acquaintance I had with that term was a Mitch Miller song that was sort of from my youth about, you know, pretend yellow rose. But it turns out that a yellow rose was a sort of generic term for a good-looking mulatto woman because, you know, the skin tends toward the yellow, I guess. And that in the Texas Revolution, there was not just a yellow rose, but the yellow rose. Her name was Emily West, and she was a New Yorker, a free woman, who signed on a contract to come down to Galveston Bay and help a man named Jim Morgan set up a resort. Her contract was for a year. She wanted some money so that she and her mother could establish an inn, which is something they always wanted to do. So she signed her contract, came on down, and joined Jim Morgan in the effort to try to build this resort, and that, as far as she was concerned, get enough money to go back and take care of her inn. Of course, other people had different plans, and that's where we're going to go. We open the book, we find ourselves in Morgan's Point, Texas, and it's February 24th, 1836, and we're in the hotel that Jim Morgan has built in order to get his resort off to a good start. Girl, let's have another. Sam Houston called to me, waving his mug at the end of a buckskin-clad arm. Fringe danced under an armpit stained with sweat. It probably smelled worse than a dead polecat, but sure as cotton's white. I wasn't about to test that theory. My name is Emily West, but in Morgan's Point Hotel, they called me Girl, a common enough name for a mulatto woman working in a saloon. Somehow, my skin didn't crawl when Sam Houston said it. He didn't use the derogatory tone most of these louts did with us darker people. I could slough off the insults better than most, being a high yellow mix of white and black, a free woman under contract, not the slave that people figured me for. Still and all, that constant boy, girl business felt like needles jabbing every time. Houston, though, he sounded like he was just calling for service. That's what got me interested in the first place. I nodded in his direction and made my way toward him, dodging and slapping away the customary pats and squeezes, some on my backside, some higher, some lower. The clients of Morgan's Point Hotel Saloon were rougher than an outhouse corncob. That's what I like. A woman who steps right to it when a man calls, Houston said to his companions without taking his eyes off me. What say, General? Demanded the man sitting across the table from him. Turn your good air so you can hear me, Deef, Houston said. Then, playing to the rest of the table, he yelled, Oh, I forgot. Deep ain't got a good ear. This is one of Houston's very best friends. His name, when you see it on the page, real name, is Deaf Smith. But Deep was the colloquial way of pronouncing deaf, and there's actually a town right in the area called Deaf Smith. So he really did exist, and he had staying power. The men roared with their delight, Deef right along with them. Houston handed over his empty tankard, then picked up his jackknife and began whittling on a shapeless wooden block. The slivers joined the other savings that covered his moccasin. He wasn't much to look at, this Sam Houston. Nose a bit too big, lips too thin, his hairline headed north, and bushy sideburns curving south along his chin. Kind of disappointing, since I'd heard so much about what a warrior he was. Wounded hero of the Battle of New Orleans. Gossip here was that President Andrew Jackson had sent this big drunk to pull that God-forsaken Mexican hotbox into the Union. Why they'd want it was beyond me. It didn't seem to me worth the wind it would take to blow every grain of sand of it into Galveston Bay, which seemed likely to happen any day. Houston just wanted to prove he could do it, was my guess. Like any man. Seems like what made the most sense was to just leave it to the Mexicans. But nobody asked me. Houston and his buddies were on their way to getting glassy-eyed, but hadn't quite arrived there yet. I got Houston's attention by making sure he got a peek inside my low-neck bodice when I bent over to pick up his mug. Then I turned around, gave my hips an extra sway, and tossed a smile and a wink back over my shoulder. As I returned to the bar, I felt his lust. Good. That meant bigger tips, and that meant bigger savings toward the inn Mother and I planned to buy when I got back to New York, where I belonged. Still in all, he didn't look like someone you'd count on to turn a mismatched conglomeration of Anglos and Mexicans into an army fit to throw off the likes of General Santa Anna. Quite a gamble for old Hickory to back him, like betting on a long shot in a cockfight, but maybe the president did that too. Houston's watery blue eyes scanned me. He tilted his head like a dog, curious and wary about a cat he's happened on. He swayed a bit, not unusual for our patrons this time of night, but more noticeable with all his height. You're a tall one, he said. Is that what makes you a great leader? I said. You're not for spotting what's obvious. Here, girl, keep your mouth to yourself. A monotone voice flared behind me. A rough hand grasped a fistful of my sleeve and pulled at me. I was about to treat his hand to a taste of my fingernails when Houston laughed and said, No, Deef, leave her be. She's got gumption, and you know I like a good laugh. He reached to dislodge his buddy's hand, but never took his eyes off of me the whole time, nor did I take mine off of his. I felt Deef release his grip and retreat. Big dog, little dog, I'd seen this act before. He hears better than he makes out, doesn't he? I said. You don't talk like a Southern nigger, Houston said. No, sir, I said, mimicking the accent of a Southern chattel. I was from New York. Then why are you here? Colonel Morgan signed me on to look out for his warehouse and serve him here in his saloon. Signed you on? Contract then? 1 year, and with 6 months to go, I wish it was already over. So, you're one of those free ones, are you? Cross my heart. I batted my eyelashes and patted the place under my blouse where I had my papers tucked away. Lots more of us around than you might want to think. Warehouse, huh? Big job for a man like Jim Morgan to trust to a girl, free or not. So must be you can read and write and cipher. Me, I said, simpering and looking up at him with half-closed eyes. A simple bar girl? Houston smiled. Deep, he said, sitting back down and grasping the handle of his mug. We must treat this woman with respect. She's probably most educated than both you and me. That's a safe bet, I guess, I said. He stuck out his hand. Houston's the name. Sam Houston. I didn't take his hand immediately. I don't have to read, write, or cipher to know who you are, General. He didn't withdraw his hand. It's Sam to you, Miss. He raised his eyebrows. I finally deigned to clasp his hand. West. Emily, General Houston. Well, Emily West, would you draw me a bath and see to my buckskins? He lifted a pair of saddlebags from the floor and slapped them on the table. I have another outfit in here needs washing as well. Well, I'll dry your bath, General, I said. Then I whispered, and that's all. What did you say, girl? Deef said. Houston shrugged. Deep here didn't catch that, but I heard you loud and clear. Deef started to answer, but looking at me with murder in his eyes, Obviously, no one challenged his general. Houston downed his beer, then leaped up and marched off toward the stairs that led to the upstairs rooms. I gathered the saddlebags and followed, deep straggling behind me. My mind was racing. I thought I had control of the situation with this overgrown, half-drunk so-called general, and suddenly I was left holding his dusty saddlebags and chasing him up the stairs. It's my first lesson on how quickly Sam Houston could turn the tables in his favor. Well, Emily does follow him upstairs, and they head right to his room directly. I passed over the general's threshold and closed his door behind me. He stood by the copper tub with his back to me in the process of disrobing. He said, without turning, "Once you've pulled out these filthy duds, just toss the saddlebags on the bed." I did what he asked. Commanded would be a better word than asked. Under the dirty clothes, I noticed a plump bag of what looked like coins. Was he trusting, forgetful, or testing me? Whatever the case, I knew enough to let it be. I stepped toward the fireplace where a pot filled with water hung, heating over the flames. This was the most luxurious room in Colonel Morgan's hotel, the Brazos Suite. In New York, they'd have laughed a week away at the idea of calling a single room a suite. But this had its own fireplace, which put it at the top of the frontier heap. If Steve Smith, for example, wanted to get clean, a big if, he'd have to go down the street to the common bathhouse and plunk himself into a tub in the presence of half a dozen other filthy creatures. "I'll just leave these here for you to take care of," Houston said, as he let his pants slide to the floor and swung one long leg into the tub. I almost remarked that it was a strange way to show me the respect he talked about downstairs, to bear himself like that. I was a common whore, but I heard my mother's cautioning voice in my head and bit my tongue. I may have been a free woman, but I was still a servant and a long ways from home. Just February to October till my year was up and I'd get my pay and my passage east, and this outpost nightmare would be over. Right now, though, the only difference between me and a slave was that my servitude had a time limit. I couldn't afford to incur Colonel Morgan's disfavor. We needed the money. I wouldn't be safe until I was back with my mother in Colonel Morgan's Hudson River summer house, the place he'd pledged to sell to us so we could start our business. What Morgan was paying me, combined with my mother's sewing and egg money and my tips, would be enough to get us out of service and into the innkeeping business we'd dreamt about for years. But even with all that on my mind, I couldn't quite leave things be with Houston. I slid back into my slave dialect. "I was coming directly with your bathwater, General, sir." He just sat there, humming and drumming his dirty fingers on the sides of the tub. Soon the humming stopped, his eyes closed, and he appeared to drift off. I won't say he passed out, although that might be nearer the truth. I picked up the hooked rod, tipped the steaming pot, and filled the bucket that had been waiting on the hearth. "Here it comes, General," I said as I approached the tub. "Fair warning, it's a little warm." Houston's eyelids flew open, but he didn't respond otherwise. I smiled to myself as I lifted the bucket. Normally, I'd ask the gentleman to cover himself, then pour the first bucket slowly from the foot of the tub to give him time to get used to the temperature. However, Houston had already proved disinclined toward modesty, so I marched right to the center of the tub, and then I stopped. An ugly wound drained pus out of his right shoulder. Did you get hurt fighting with the Indians or fighting against them? It was none of my affair, but everyone knew he'd spent some time with the Cherokees in Carolina or Tennessee or some such place, maybe even had a wife or two there. Some said he was trying to get some local chief named Bull, a name so comical for an Indian chief, I figured it was made up, getting Bull to side with him against the Mexicans. One way or the other, I suppose, he said. So he wanted me to shut up about it. Nothing is more sure to make me keep a conversation going. When? About, well, I don't know how long ago, some Indian war leading up to New Orleans. Then again in that battle, I felt a budding compassion for the man. That was nearly 24 years ago. It sure looked like a fresh wound that needed tending, not one that was years old. Was he lying? I couldn't think of a reason why he would. I've got a couple of questions here. That cover from Faragore 2225 is really great. Faragore said, and from 2159, you really have a great book. It is nice for it to be a movie. Well, thank you very much. I would like to see some producer agree with you. And from Faragore 2228, are there some real historical events that is on the Yellow Rose, or is it pure fiction? Absolutely are real historical events, and we're going to follow them through. The Texas Revolution, which happened in 1836, took about 3 or 4 months, and Texas, from that, became an independent state. They freed themselves from Mexico, and they became a republic. So Texas was a country before it was a state. As I said, it freed itself in 1836. It didn't become a state until 1845. So in between, it was its own country, and Sam Houston was its first president. The part that's not pure fiction, that is probably pure fiction, is the part that Emily played. Yes, she was there for sure, and she was, available part of the resort for Jim Morgan, but nobody knows whether she and Sam Houston ever met. There's a legend that somehow or another she got involved in the revolution, and during the final battle of San Jacinto, which we'll hear about in a moment, she distracted Santa Anna and made it possible for the revolutionaries to defeat Santa Anna. And so she was an integral part of the whole thing, according to legend. But it's a very strong legend down there. There's even an Emily Morgan Hotel that, in downtown San Antonio. And so it's not pure fiction. However, of course, as my co-author, Bob, says, all the parts that we don't know about for sure, we just ask the question, what if? And let our imaginations fill in the spaces. Let's see. Sorry about that. It sure looked like a fresh wound that needed tending, not one that was years old. Was he lying? I couldn't think of a reason why he would. Would you like for me to look after it for you? Girl, I've been tending it myself for years. He sounded as if my kindness not only counted for nothing, but even annoyed him. That infuriated me. I'd stop that smart mouth lying. I aimed at a spot some inches below his belly button and dumped the whole bucket in one hot waterfall. I was gratified to see his lobster turn pink and jump out of its nest. How's the temperature, General? I tried to keep my tone businesslike. but I was inwardly giggling that I'd revenged myself for his early insolence and current lie. His little soldier would be tender for a while. Give him credit, though. Most men would have jumped up in a rage, but Houston didn't flinch. Perfect girl, he said. Keep it coming. This time, the way he said girl carried the same insulting tone the rest of the men used. So what had started as a friendly relationship had become hostile. Well, as the revolution gets started and they write a constitution and take off to the west where Santa Anna is, their goal is to get to San Antonio and to the Alamo, which I'm sure you've heard of. An 18th century mission that the Spaniards built as a way of, quote, civilizing the Native Americans, meaning enslaving and killing them. And as he goes, he gathers more and more people, and they start to form an army. Even though they're not disciplined enough to be an army, they want to go on the attack. They go quite a ways. And then at one point, they meet two women coming from the west. These ladies, Sam says to the assembled, can't talk about this anymore, so it's up to me to speak. I'll put it as plain as I can. He started, but his voice seized, struggling with the moment he finally regained control. The Alamo has fallen. Of course, there was an uproar and a volley of curses and cries to go after Santa Anna and get revenge, but that was nothing compared to what happened after Houston's next bombshell. Santa Anna slaughtered every single one of our brave patriots. He gave no quarter, took no prisoners. There was a moment of stunned silence, then cries for vengeance. But Sam held up his hand again. Mrs. Dickinson and Mrs. Tolliver had been through a great trial. They were captured by the Mexicans, then released as witnesses to what happened. Mrs. Dixon was even shot, nipped in the leg as she left their Alamo with her child in her arms. The huge majority of the crowd wanted to go up against the Mexican army immediately. Some were even moving toward the river, heading for San Antonio or wherever they might find the little Napoleon's army. I know you want to avenge ourselves against what that so-called Napoleon, and no one wants it more than I do, but we have to let strategy overcome our emotions, and strategy at this point dictates we retreat toward the east. Well, that gets a big reaction. Nobody wanted to go back the same way they came. They came quite a ways. But he knows, Sam does, that there's a lot more to do to get this army trained up. During the course of their journey, he and Emily start a romantic relationship, at least in our version of the revolution. And as they retreat east, they go through what has become known as the runaway scrape. And so finally, as Santa Anna chases them and they keep running, he figures that he's got his army trained and it's time to turn and fight. And we get to the Battle of San Jacinto, which is the culminating battle that actually turns the retreat into a victory. And this is Sam's battlefield speech as he stands before the men and he says, "Today is the day. I know you've been frustrated more than I have, no more than I have, but I told you we'd meet the enemy when the time was right, and that time is now. Huzzah, a voice said, and Sam immediately threw up a warning hand. Today is our day. We will fight and we will win, but only if we remain silent until we attack. Become like Indians stalking game. Then, when the attack comes, you can become Texicans again, fierce and merciless. He knew a cheer was coming, so he threw up his hand again, and the cheer died in a thousand throats. Some have thought me a coward, that I was running from the pepper bellies, but to fight when defeat is sure is not courage, but it is idiocy. We had to wait for our day, and today is our day. We had to retreat and drill until we were ready. Today, we are ready. Today, we have Santa Ana traps surrounded on three sides by water. Their only out will be by going straight toward us. And today, we are ready. They can't escape. Well, it turns out that indeed they can't escape. And as I've just related, this is the beginning of the Republic of Texas. And now get a couple of more questions before I close. Says, is there any continuation for the Yellow Rose? Well, I've got a couple of great ideas that my co-author and I had contemplated going on, but Bob passed away shortly after the book was published, and he did get to hold it in his hands and read it and so on before he left us, but I just haven't felt like going ahead. But there's a lot of ideas. Emily in history just vanishes. Nobody knows what happened, where she went. So we were going to fantasize that she went back to New York and perhaps became involved in the Underground Railroad. That would certainly fit into history, but we haven't got any question from it. And there's a question from Faragor 2159 asking about the title of The Yellow Rose, which I mentioned in the beginning. I'll say it again because I think it's a really interesting fact. A yellow rose at the time was a fairly general term, and it designated a good-looking mulatto woman. And in general, it was just some way that that people termed a person of that nature. The Yellow Rose was for Emily West, the one who was involved by legend in the Texas Revolution. Once again, a freeborn woman who was of lighter hue, and so she became, by legend, the Yellow Rose. And let's see, said, is there a story behind it? I'm not sure exactly the meaning of that question, since I think I've told the story behind the title, if that's what you mean. And I've told quite a bit of the story. Dive on into the book, and I think you'll find the answer to all your questions, as well as a lot of delicious adventures and romance and entertainment. I'm past time, which is fine with me, but I was given a certain amount of time and a certain amount of elbow room, so I've really enjoyed talking about this. I always do, and I am going to bid you farewell and hope that you keep in mind Bonita, and You Can't Keep Her. Not only keep them in mind, but keep them in your Kindle or on your bookshelves, wherever it takes you to go ahead and get in the pages and read them. And as well, the Maxwell Saga trilogy, the Maxwell Vendetta, the Second Vendetta, and Swindle in Sawtooth Valley, which will be available next month. So with that, farewell. Thank you. Have a wonderful Saturday.